you, Scott. Well, good evening, everybody. It is May 19th, 2020, 7:01 p.m., and I'm shortly going to call the meeting of the City Council to order. But there's some things we need to take care of before we call the meeting to order. And so the meeting is being held electronically, as you know. It's an obvious statement, but we're doing it to comply with the governor's now safer at home order and to ensure the safety of all residents and our staff. All members of the City Council, the staff, our presenters are participating from their homes or offices. And before we begin, there's a few things that we need to cover for those listening in and hoping to participate in portions of the meeting. The city is committed to continuing to receive and hear your input on matters. We've been collecting public input through our council correspondence web form, voicemail, and our engagement website, bettertogether.edina.org. It is important you know that all comments have been received and read prior to the start of the meeting. You do not need to submit the same feedback in any other way. All feedback is being considered equally, regardless of the manner in which it was submitted. Tonight, there'll be 2 times to call in to provide comment via telephone. The first is when we do our community comment portion of the agenda, which will come up fairly shortly here. You're allowed to speak about anything that is not on tonight's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. The second is the public hearing portion of the agenda, and there is a preliminary plat matter with variances at 7413 and 7425 York Terrace in the public hearing portion of the agenda. That is the sole item on the public hearing portion of the agenda this evening. And that'll come up a little bit later in the meeting. So if you want to call in for community comment or provide testimony for the public hearing, call 1-800-374-0221. That's 1-800-374-0221. Enter conference ID 685-5314. 685-5314. Press star 1 to indicate that you'd like to speak, and you'll be placed in the speaking queue. Remember, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak, just like you were at a live city council meeting. Manager Scott Neal will be our timer, and he'll let you know when you get close to your 3-minute mark, or especially if you get over the 3-minute mark. Remember, you do not need to call in tonight unless you want to, if you've already provided feedback. Also, if you can avoid redundancy, that would be a wonderful thing. Call in if you have new comments or information to bring forward. And it's an appropriate time to do so in either public comment or in the one public hearing matter that we have. To make sure residents have an opportunity to participate, we will not act on variances at 7413 and 7425 York Terrace tonight. The public hearing on that matter will remain open until noon, Wednesday, May 27th. So you can leave a voicemail with your feedback or submit a comment online at bettertogether.edina.org until noon on Wednesday, May 27th. Thanks again. As we've said before, when we've had our virtual city council meetings, we appreciate your patience as we work to conduct this meeting online using different software types and almost 20 people, all participating from their own homes or offices. We hope there will not be any electronic issues, but be assured that we will do our best to continue the meeting as best we can if we have any electronic difficulty. All right, so now is the time to call the meeting to order. And Miss Allison, would you do roll call, please?
Absolutely. Councilmember Anderson?
Ron, you're still on mute.
Still on mute, Councilmember Anderson.
You had it off there for a split second. There you go.
Here.
Councilmember Brindle?
Here.
Councilmember Fisher?
Here.
Councilmember Staunton?
Here.
Mayor Hovland?
Here. The next matter on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, and my mic will be turned on, and I think that might be the only one that's turned on. So here we go with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a form of meeting agenda in front of us this evening. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the agenda in any fashion? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the meeting agenda as shown.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we got a motion by Member Anderson, second by Member Staunton to adopt the meeting agenda. Any further discussion? Roll call, please. Ms. Allison?
Councilmember Anderson,
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle,
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher,
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton,
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. All right, thanks, folks.
And
Now, before we move on to community comment, the meeting agenda is approved. Now, before community comment, we're now going to hear from residents who would like to speak about something that's not on tonight's agenda or otherwise scheduled for a future public hearing. And remember to participate in community comment, call in now at 800-374-0221. Conference ID number is 6855314, 6855314. An operator will ask for your name and street address. Press *1 to indicate you'd like to speak. You'll be placed into the speaking queue and introduced when it's your turn to speak. Again, a reminder, you'll have 3 minutes and our city manager will time your speaking, and they will Manager Neal will let you know if you go over the 3-minute mark. And I think Jennifer Benarod is monitoring the community comment portion of the agenda. Do we have anybody in the queue? Director Benarod?
Mayor Hovland, members of the council, this is Communications Director Jennifer Benarod on the line. We do not currently have any callers on the line. I would recommend that you just sit tight for a minute or so in case we have anyone yet to call in.
I think that's wise counsel on your part. We'll wait a few minutes here to see if anyone calls in because of the delay in broadcast. All right, Director Benarod, are you comfortable that we move on from community comment?
I think so, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This would normally be the time when our city manager would respond to community comments made 2 weeks prior, but I don't recall that we had anyone that called in for our meeting 2 weeks ago either. So, Director Neal, you're shaking your head side to side.
No,
Nothing to report out. Okay.
nothing to report.
All right, we've got a consent agenda in front of us this evening. Is there anyone on the council that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing nothing, is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda as shown?
So moved.
Member Brindle moves. Need a second?
Second.
Member Fisher seconds. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, on adoption of the consent agenda. Ms. Allison?
Councilmember Anderson,
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle,
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher,
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton,
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. All right, very good. The consent agenda is deemed adopted. Now, we are going to move on to the portion of the agenda that has special recognitions and presentations involved. We've got several proclamations this evening, and all very, very important proclamations. We've got folks here with us to accept the proclamations. The first one deals with National Police Week 2020, and Sergeant Dave Venny is here to accept that. And I think Chief Nelson was with us earlier, and yes, here he is, and he's still with us, and it's nice to have him here as well. The proclamation for National Police Week 2020 reads as follows. Whereas the week of May 10 through 16, 2020 is National Police Week in the United States. And whereas there are approximately 900,000 law enforcement officers serving in communities across the United States, including the dedicated members of the Edina Police Department. And whereas nearly 60,000 assaults against law enforcement officers are reported each year. resulting in approximately 17,000 injuries. And whereas since the first recorded death in 1791, over 21,000 law enforcement officers in the United States have made the ultimate sacrifice and been killed in the line of duty. And whereas the names of these dedicated public servants are engraved on the walls of the National Law Enforcement Memorial in Washington, D.C. And whereas 307 new names of fallen heroes are being added to the National Law Enforcement Memorial in May 2020, including 135 line of duty deaths in 2019 and 172 historical deaths. The memorial currently honors a total of 22,217 fallen officers on the wall. Whereas the service and sacrifice of all officers killed in the line of duty was honored during the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund's annual Candlelight Vigil held on May 13, 2020. And whereas the Candlelight Vigil is part of National Police Week, which took place earlier this year with a virtual Candlelight Vigil on May 13th. And whereas May 15th is designated as Peace Officers Memorial Day in honor of all the fallen officers and their families, and U.S. flags were flown at half-staff on May 15th. And now, therefore, the City Council of the City of Edina, Minnesota does hereby proclaim May 10th through the 16th, 2020 as National Police Week in the City of Edina, calls upon the people of Edina to observe this week in honor of the men and women whose diligence and professionalism keep the residents and the City of Edina safe. Is there a motion to adopt a proclamation?
So moved.
Second.
Adopt a proclamation by acclamation. All in favor? Yes. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, Ms. Allison.
My apologies. Councilmember Anderson,
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle,
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher,
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton,
Aye.
Hovland.
Aye. As I mentioned earlier, we have Sergeant Dave Venny with us to accept the proclamation, and I think the sergeant has a few remarks. Sergeant Venny.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. On behalf of the police officers, I'd like to thank you for accepting the Police Week proclamation. I'd also like to thank you for recognizing Law Enforcement Memorial Day last week during the Mayor's Minute. We really appreciate the thoughtfulness on this special day. I think we all understand how unique this year has been and most likely will continue to be. We've all had to make difficult decisions personally and professionally during this difficult time. This includes our own Law Enforcement Memorial Association, also known as LEMA. They had to make the difficult decision this year to cancel all of the on-site activities that traditionally take place at the Law Enforcement Memorial in St. Paul. So even though most of the events for the National Police Week were canceled, it's important for us to remember the 135 officers who made the ultimate sacrifice in 2019. These officers will be added to the National Law Enforcement Memorial this year, along with an additional 172 historical deaths. We are very fortunate to work in a community that supports our efforts and understands the difficult times that we currently are in. Again, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for the recognition, and we appreciate all of your support.
Thank you, Sergeant Venny. And Chief Nelson, any supplementary comments?
Just a sincere thank you to the mayor and council for accepting the proclamation. Really appreciate it.
And our earnest thanks and gratitude for everybody that serves us so well as part of our Edina Police Department. It is a stellar organization, and I think the envy of police departments across the state. So you all do such wonderful work, and we're really proud to have you working in our community. I'm proud to call you our peace officers. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next proclamation honors the Edina class of 2020 that's been through so much. You remember we talked about these students having been born right after September 11th, and here they are now graduating in the COVID crisis time frame. And we're really pleased to have Superintendent John Schultz with us this evening. They've had so much going on at the school district to have them be able to slip into our meeting even for a few minutes is really a wonderful thing. So Dr. Schultz, thanks for being with us this evening.
Good to be here. Thank you.
All right. The proclamation honoring Edina's class of 2020 reads as follows. Whereas the students in the class of 2020 are completing their final year of high school through distance learning, missing events such as spring sports, spring fine arts, spring activities and awards programs, the prom, and a traditional commencement. Whereas the students in the class of 2020 are completing their final year of high school in isolation from their teachers and their peers. And whereas the students of the class of 2020 have shown great commitment to completing their senior academic year successfully. And whereas the students in the class of 2020 have shown great commitment to staying in virtual contact with their teachers and classmates, whereas the students in the class of 2020 have continued to demonstrate their commitment to their school and their community. And whereas the students in the class of 2020 have shown outstanding resilience and heart during this unprecedented time. Now, therefore, the City Council does hereby proclaim Sunday, May 31, 2020, as Edina Class of 2020 Day in the City of Edina in recognition of their commitment of their class to their education, their community, their friends, and the sacrifice this class has made under the present circumstances. Is there a motion to adopt the proclamation?
So moved.
Member Fisher moves.
Second.
And
All right, thank you. Who is the seconder? Member Anderson? Or Member Staunton? Thank you.
okay.
All right, we've got any further discussion? Roll call, please, with respect to the proclamation, Ms. Allison.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle.
Aye.
Member Fisher.
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton.
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye, excuse me, aye. And Dr. Schultz, again, thanks for being with us this evening. And I saw a little agenda of all the things that were going on and planned for the graduation activities. And maybe you want to comment a little bit about what these resilient kids can expect for recognition as we get into the latter part of May, early June.
Right. So first of all, thank you so much for this proclamation. As you really did a great job explaining, Mayor, is that these seniors have bookended their career in school with unusual events, and this one is probably the most unusual for them. They don't get the pomp and circumstance of the 500-year tradition of receiving their cap and gown. They'll get a cap and gown, but throwing their hats and being recognized by an audience, by their parents in an arena. So this proclamation it means a lot to the students. Next week, they're going to be picking up their caps and gowns. They're also going to be turning in their materials to us through a curbside pickup at Edina High School. And on May 31st, we are going to be breaking the city into different routes. We don't know exactly how many yet. And we're going to be delivering the diploma jackets directly to their homes. So they'll be delivered by the school administrator and school board members will be part of that delivery. So we're going to be doing that all day on May 31st. So this proclamation is just perfect for that day. Our senior party parents are working with neighborhoods, working with parents to decorate those neighborhoods. We're making it a special day. I was talking to some students last week, and I think this will be more of a memorable commencement than if they had a commencement in an arena, because they know that it will have been done during a time, during a pandemic that unfortunately robbed us from being in close contact with these seniors as they graduate and move on to the next step in their life. So again, Mayor, City Council, City Manager Neal, thank you for all the wonderful support you give Edina schools, especially the seniors of class of 2020. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. And does anyone else have a comment from the council? All right, good. I don't think anybody has any kids graduating this year.
Otherwise they would have, right? All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Schultz. The final proclamation of the evening is Preservation Month 2020, and Emily Boddicker, our Assistant City Planner, is here to accept the proclamation. And then we got a special event after the proclamation is read, recognizing two of our longtime Edina residents. We'll get to that momentarily. The proclamation for Preservation Month, May 2020, reads as follows. Whereas historic preservation is an effective tool for managing growth and sustainable development, revitalizing neighborhoods, fostering local pride, and maintaining community character while enhancing livability. And whereas historic preservation is relevant for communities across the nation, both urban and rural, and for Americans of all ages, all walks of life, and all ethnic backgrounds. And whereas it is important to celebrate the role of history in our lives and the contributions made by dedicated individuals in helping to preserve the tangible aspects of the heritage that has shaped us as a people. And whereas Preservation Month 2020 is sponsored by the Edina Heritage Preservation Commission, now therefore we, the City Council of the City of Edina, do hereby proclaim May 2020 as Preservation Month and call upon the people of Edina to join their fellow citizens in recognizing and participating in this special observance. Preservation Month, May 2020. Is there a motion to adopt the proclamation?
So moved.
Second.
We had a motion and second. Is that Member Fisher on the second?
Anderson.
Member Anderson? All right, thank you. Very good. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, Ms. Ellison.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle.
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher.
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. And Ms. Boddicker, do you have some remarks you'd want to make?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor and City Council. I just wanted to note that this year, the Heritage Preservation Commission was looking forward to celebrating Preservation Month by hosting a walking tour that was led by our chair, Annie Schilling. And due to the circumstances, they were unable to host that meeting in person. And so with the help of IT and the city's IT and communications department, they put together the walking tour that they were going to host in person as a virtual tour. So I just wanted to point that out, and we hope that you all have a chance to take a look at it and check it out.
Commissioner Schilling, would you like to talk about the new app and how people can find it, how long the walk is? And I know that, I bet Jane Lonnquist knows this, 6,000 steps.
Yes.
Somebody figured that out, so thanks to whoever did that. You want to, Commissioner Schilling?
Sure. I'm thrilled that we could come up with at least some alternative to the in-person walking tour, though I'm very excited for the prospect of the future to be able to lead people on this walking tour, but they can certainly get a warm-up in just under 3 miles, 6,000 steps. I should know off the top of my head how many historic resources you're going to be coming in contact with, but it's a lot. And, you know, it's amazing how much history you're going to be able to get a little more knowledge of and get a little bit more comfortable with just in that short distance. We're really excited that we were able to pull this together.
I'm just looking for the website address for it, but is it edinamn.org/historic walk or something? Can you remember what the...
Emily, I think you could probably speak to this better than I can.
Maybe.
Yes, it's I don't have the easy link, but it's edinagis.maps.arcgis, and it's a /historic map, and we'll have a link to it on the city's website.
Oh, terrific.
Easy one is edinamn.gov/historic walk.
Yeah, it was pretty close.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah. All right. So the next matter we have in front of us following that designation is the 2020 Heritage Preservation Award. And we have one of our other commissioners from the Heritage Preservation Commission with us, Jane Lonnquist, that we all know so well. And Jean Raycamp Larson. Jean, I look for some house of yours in the paper every Sunday, but I see him once in a while. But it's good to see you and have you with us. And I hope the world of architecture is still chugging along for you. So, Emily, do you want to introduce Jane? How do you want to do this?
Sure. I was just going to introduce one of our commissioners, Jane Lundquist, who's going to present the award tonight.
All right, very good.
Great. Well, as we just heard, May is the month that we celebrate the historic fabric and the great design that is found in all of our communities. And in 2003, the Edina Heritage Preservation Commission started this annual award in order to recognize outstanding contributions to the preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and use of Edina's heritage resources. Collectively, these award winners really highlight the rich history in our community over time. So I'm very happy to announce that the 2020 Edina Heritage Preservation Award goes to the Potter House and the renovation efforts of the current homeowners and the builders Dovetail Renovation and architects Anders Motny and Jean Raykamp Larson of Raykamp Larson Architects Incorporated. Their renovation and expansion took tremendous care to honor the home's historic features and match them on all the facades, while also making the garage much less visible from the streetscape. So I just want to tell you briefly a little bit of history, and Emily may also be showing some photos so you can see the home. But this English Tudor revival home is really an important contributing resource within the Country Club District. It was built between 1930 and 1932 for Mr. L.A. Potter and his wife, who went on to have 10 children. The Potter House sits on the former site of the farmhouse of Henry Brown, and he was the Minneapolis lumberman who purchased Edina Mill and had a farm famous for its Scotch bred cattle. In 1922, Sam Thorpe purchased the Browndale farm, as well as the Craig Farm and part of the Baird homestead to establish the Country Club District, which, as you know, is listed as on the National Register of Historic Places and is an Edina Heritage Landmark. The Potter House was used as an early gathering place for the community, and St. Stephen's Church was actually started in the basement, and they even had their first pancake breakfast there. So on the call, as we said, I believe we have Jean Raykamp Larson and maybe Anders Motny of Raykamp Larson Architects, and Annie Schilling, the chair of the Heritage Preservation Commission, is accepting the award on behalf of the homeowners. So congratulations and thank you.
Well, Jane, I'm sorry the homeowners couldn't be with us this evening. It would have been fun to have met them personally on the with regard to the award, but certainly having Jean with us to talk a little bit about the work they did, and Anders, looking forward to hearing from you about the wonderful detailed work that you did. I was over there last year for a Edina Give and Go fundraiser, and it was a wonderful experience walking through the home and seeing the work that was done. So, Jean, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, great, thanks. Mayor and council members, thank you for giving this award and recognizing historic preservation and good design. We can't take it for granted. It takes thoughtful care and a good team of people, starting with, of course, the Preservation Commission that takes care to review things, and homeowners that value where they live and the resource that these historic houses bring and the value that they bring to a community over time. We always feel so lucky to be on a project of this caliber that has all the parts and pieces that set it up for success. And we really learn from the houses. So that's the biggest thing, is we look closely at what exists, and we take care to sensitively add and replicate details that should be replicated. And we pair that with the home priorities about function and space. And in the end, it comes out looking like it's supposed to be there. In this case, we very much wanted to preserve the facade as the primary element, and make sure that the addition off to the one side set back from that front facade. And of course, then, as Jane mentioned, to change the garage so that it was less primary and secondary. It was a great project to work on, and Anders, who is here as well, I saw on the call, was my partner throughout the project from beginning to end from our office, and together, along with that Dovetail and Martha Dayton Design and landscape architect. We brought the project together.
All right. Thanks, Gene. Anders, is there anything you wanted to add? Now he's staying on mute. You know, Gene, one of the things I'm trying to recall about as I walked through, and you could see all the historic preservation, but it seemed to me like in really subtle ways, you tried to update it to accommodate the way people want to live in a modern way. And it was done in such a manner where you really couldn't tell that it was different from what was originally there. And for some reason, I'm thinking of the dining room and I think the kitchen, of course. But some of those things that were so subtle that maintained the historic integrity of the house, I thought, yeah, you ought to really be proud, you and Anders, of that work that you did on the home.
Yeah, I'm so glad you noticed. A few of the details are we reused some of the arched dining room windows. They had been in a sun porch, and then we reused and replicated them to create the windows in the dining room. The proportion of windows, looking closely at the proportions that exist in a house and then replicating those, the details on a new fireplace, replicate some of the parts and pieces of the living room. So all those things add up, and sometimes they're kind of quietly in the background, but it feels right when it's done.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful site in the back with all of the patios and then hanging right over the creek. It's spectacular. So congratulations to you and Anders, and congratulations to Julie and Doug Baker that undertook this project, moving from a different home and country club and seeing this opportunity and maximizing the potential of the remodeling. So
that's right.
Any other council members wish to comment? All right. So Jane,
Mr. Mayor,
Annie, yes.
I just wanted to say, it is truly beautiful. I really enjoyed reading about the history of it. I feel like I learned more about my community by just reading my council packet, and that's always a good thing. And, the photos, of course, are beautiful, and it was a really nicely done project. So congratulations.
Thank you. I hope there's more to come.
Yeah, we do too. We hope there are as well. And is Jane Lundquist still on? I'm trying to find her.
I am there.
All right, good. Well, Jane, good to see you momentarily there. And thanks for serving your town on the Heritage Preservation Commission. And Chair Schilling, the same to you. Thank you so much. I think this walking tour might be a real nice hit as people get outside and want to be moving around. And to Member Fisher's point, they can learn a lot of history by loading that app and taking it with them on the walking tour.
Mr. Mayor, if I might have a moment, the homeowners were not able to be here, but they did send a statement for me to read. If I could have just a couple minutes to read that.
Yes, please do.
They said, we would like to thank the Heritage Preservation Commission for all it does to celebrate buildings and places in Edina that have historical and architectural significance. They are part of what makes this community interesting. We are pleased that our house has been recognized, but clearly the credit for the work goes to our architect, Ray Camp Larson, and our contractor, Dovetail, and all the subcontractors who worked on the project. Their hard work, skill, and attention to detail made such a difference. We are so grateful for the craftsmen who built the home originally back in 1929. They set the bar high for all of us. Many thanks to all.
Good. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll make that part of the record in this matter.
Wonderful.
So, well, thanks to all of you for being with us this evening. Jane, your college son is staying healthy, is he?
Yep. Got 2 college kids home and they're healthy. So thank you. Thanks for letting us participate.
Yeah, good. Yeah, those college kids, they don't like that social distancing. I think it's hard on them. All right. Well, I think we'll move on to the next portion of the agenda. Thanks for being with us this evening. And we're going to move on now to the public hearing portion of the agenda. And we have only one public hearing matter this evening, and Director Teague has it. But before we start the public hearing, just a reminder again now for residents who might want to provide testimony in this matter, You should call in now at 800-374-0221. Conference ID is 6855314, 6855314. An operator will ask for your name and street address, and then press star 1 to indicate you'd like to speak. You'll be put in the queue for speaking and introduced when it's your turn, and then you'll be given 3 minutes to speak. And Manager Neal will let you know when your time is up and you need to wrap up your comments. So, and remember, if you've already provided comments, you don't need to do it again. We've got them as part of the record. And then we are going to continue this matter to Wednesday, May 27th, to the noon hour on the 27th. So, Director Teague.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. This property is located in the southeast corner of the city. Whoops, I've got the wrong graphic. Apologize for that. Okay, here we go. This property is located in the southeast corner of the city. It is located south of the YMCA on York Terrace and east of the Yorkdale Townhomes, so east of York Avenue, close to the Edina-Richfield border. There are 2 lots with 2 existing homes on the site. This first slide shows the house on the north lot. Moving to the south, note that there's a gravel or dirt driveway that accesses the garage. In Edina, we require all of our driveways to be paved. So should the council approve this, one of the conditions is that this driveway would need to be paved. The applicant is agreeable to that condition. Then moving to the south, another existing home on the site. And the applicant wants to, what the proposal is here is to split these 2 lots into 3 lots. This particular home that we're looking at, although it's shaded by the trees, was built in 1936. And we were talking about the history of Edina previously. Our records show that this house again was built in 1936. We were thinking that it was placed on the site in 1936. But I did learn from a resident who's lived in this neighborhood for a number of years that this house was actually moved to the property in the 1970s. We just didn't have a record of it. So this lot actually sat vacant through the 50s and 60s. So again, what the applicant is proposing to do is to take the 2 lots and create 3. Note that the proposed lot lines are somewhat skewed and angled. This was done by the surveyor in order to create 75 feet of width for each lot at the street. So they did accomplish that with these proposed lot lines. However, we do measure lot width 50 feet back from the street. So we actually measured at this point. So what staff had suggested to the applicant, and the Planning Commission agreed with this, is to straighten those lot lines out. We've found that when we create lot lines like that, it can be disputed in the future. Just maintaining those angled lot lines become difficult. It doesn't change the proposed width. So this north lot would be 59 feet, the middle lot 75, and then 91 feet for the south lot. And again, the purpose, so because this lot is wider than the others, it's for the purpose of saving that Tudor style home that was moved on to the property. So to provide a little more history, this block was platted in 1951. There's an existing house, so the 2 lots we're looking at are 9 and 10 on the screen. There was an existing home on this property that was built in 1934. So this plat was done essentially around that home, and that's the reason that this lot is a little bit deeper, and the lot number 9 is more shallow. So again, this lot 9 remained vacant throughout the 50s and 60s. The rest of the homes, all generally 75 feet in width, were built in the early 1950s. So this request requires a subdivision, a lot width variance for that north lot depth variances for each lot, and also lot area variances. So this is a very busy graphic. The intent here is just to indicate that it's a history of similar type requests that we've had in the city. The purpose here is just to indicate, as the council knows, we've had some that were approved and some that were denied. The council has really taken a close look at each individual property and based their decision on the characteristics within that neighborhood. So with that in mind, staff did prepare findings for both approval and denial on this one that were included in the Planning Commission staff report. In this case, the Planning Commission and the City Council, or the Planning Commission and staff, are recommending approval. We do believe that the findings for the variance have been met. So again, the plat was done around the existing home. If that home were removed, in all likelihood, these two properties would have been created with 4 75-foot wide lots, and evening out the block. So again, that practical difficulty was caused by the previous owners of the property and working around that home, and also trying to preserve that existing home on lot 9. Those circumstances are unique to this neighborhood, again, to preserve that home on lot 9. What the applicant, I didn't mention, intends to do here is he lives in the house to the south, and he has a growing family and is hopeful to build and live in the home in between the two houses. He currently rents the home to the north. So with that, again, staff and the Planning Commission are recommending approval. As mentioned earlier, you were asked to conduct the public hearing, keep the public hearing open till noon on May 27th, and then continue final action to the June 2nd meeting. So with that, I can stop there and answer any questions. And again, the applicant is on the line for a presentation as well.
All right, good. Thank you, Director. Are there questions for Director Teague at this point in time? All right. Mr. Razul, are you on the line?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, good. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I understand Director Teague has discussed this with you, and he has informed you that you'd have about 10 minutes to make your presentation. So you should feel free, Mr. Razul, to go ahead and make your presentation at this time. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holland. Thank you. Mr. Holland, well, thank you very much. Dear Mayor Holland, dear City Council members, today I and my family coming to you with a request to fulfill our dream and necessity, frankly, and be able to subdivide and build our house. When we have moved to our block, it was only us, newlyweds, and now we have 2 beautiful kids. Our kids are growing in height and size, and as much as we want to fit everything, their clothes, toys, beds, we're finding less and less room to accommodate their stuff. We desperately need room for them to thrive. There were many days when we really wished to have the opportunity to grow. The 1936 built house that we reside in now is poorly planned and was not designed to raise a family. I guess house planning was different then. Our kitchen is so small, we can barely fit at the table, 4 of us. And the kids are only 4 and 2 years old. So there is no room for kids to play in the house. We're truly running out of space. We love our neighborhood. It has everything to offer a family can ask for. It has everything to have a healthy and happy childhood. Today we have our closest neighbors on the call, my next door neighbor, John Sandal, and Alexander Stashinsky, who are fully supporting our request and good deeds. Taking the opportunity, I'm expressing my highest appreciation to Mr. Kerry Teague and the Edina Planning Division for their guidance, support, and truly incredible education. Dear Mayor Holland and respected council members, we're candidly thankful for your effort and support in considering our request to you. Your approval means the world to us and will determine the future of our family here. Having this opportunity would ensure that our family will grow, thrive, and will be paying back for years and years to come to our neighborhood and wonderful city of Edina community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Razul. Are there any council members that have questions for Mr. Razul? All right. I'm going to open this matter up for public testimony. If we have people in the queue, Ms. Director Benarat, you can ask them to come forward.
Mayor Hovland, we do have 3 people on the call. Currently, none has indicated that they would like to speak. Again, callers, please remember to press *1 when you're ready to speak. Okay, we do have our first one. Operator Chloe, will you please put through Mr. John Sundal? Please go ahead, starting with your full name and address.
Mr. Sundal, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, Mr. Sundal. Yeah, we can hear you.
Perfect. I just wanted to call in support of Blaz. He's a neighbor, a good citizen, always cooperative, and I believe that if it meets the criteria of Edina building and applications, that I fully support this as a neighbor.
Well, good. Thank you, Mr. Sundal. Appreciate you calling in.
Thank you.
And supporting your neighbor. Thank you.
Yep. Goodbye.
Operator, will you please put through Mr. Tolshinsky?
Good evening.
This line is now open.
Yes, good evening. Would you please give us your full name again and your address?
Yes, Alexander Tolchinsky, 7321 Xerxes Avenue South.
Thank you, Mr. Tolchinsky. Go ahead.
I also just wanted to call in and express my support for Blaz's application. He has been a wonderful neighbor. Our kids play together, and I have been bribed with his mother's lamb pilaf if he is allowed to bring her over. So I want to express double my support because of that. I've seen the lot, and I've kind of seen, because we walk our dog past it almost every single day, and it is definitely tiny, and they're kind of running out of ideas. So I really hope that you guys approve this so that we don't lose a good neighbor. We built a really, really good community in the last few years, and really want to keep that up and hopefully have the kids go to school together. So just want to show my support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tolchinsky.
I do have one more caller on the line, but he has not indicated that he'd like to speak. Again, callers, please remember to press *1 if you'd like to speak to the council. If he does not indicate that he would like to speak, I would encourage you to keep the line open for another minute or two in case others decide to join the call.
Again, good advice. Because of the slight delay in the broadcast, we'll wait a few more minutes to see if anybody else wants to testify.
I do have someone now. Operator, will you please put through Mr. Tom Kessler?
Sure. His line is open now.
Whatever is right, that's what I'm
Good evening.
Good evening.
City Council. My name's Tom Kessler. I've been a property owner on the block for, I think better 20 years now. and I just figured I'd call in. I read the request from Mr. Razul on the proposal, and I guess the question I would have for the city council is, I know that this is a redevelopment area in the city of Edina, and I know it's underneath, I think, a commission or a council, and there's a lot of rental property on the street, including mine. And I was just wondering if the city council had taken into consideration of potentially exploring that block as a planned unit development, to basically look at that for low-income housing, as I think majority of the properties on the street are rental properties already. They kind of sit across from common bond communities. And if we're looking to increase the amount of rental property, wouldn't that be something the city might want to look into, and with some kind of a plan of how that could benefit the community? So then that's all the comments I wanted to add to the council tonight, and just if there's any consideration on that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Tesler.
No more callers at this time, but again, I would encourage you to just wait a minute or two in case we have anyone else who'd like to join.
We'll do that. While we're waiting, did any of the comments of any of the testifiers or Mr. Razul's comments cause any council members to have further questions for Director Teague? Okay. Director Benarott, what do you think? Can we safely close?
I think you may move on.
All right, we may move on. All right, good. So the notion as requested by Director Teague is that we keep this matter, Resolution 2020-52, which would authorize a preliminary plat with variances at 7413 and 7425 York Terrace. Keep that matter open until noon on May 27th and continue it for action as an item on the June 2nd City Council agenda. Is there a motion to that effect?
Mr. Mayor? Just
Yes.
a question for Mr. Teague prior to asking for a motion on that. There were actually two potential plats that were shown, and I'm wondering what direction are you leaning here?
Yes, so the recommendation is what's labeled the staff alternative plat with the red lines on it. So what would happen here, should the council approve this on June 2nd? The applicant has to come back for final plat approval. So the final plat would show those adjusted lot lines, and that would be the plat that gets its final approval. The lot areas, in terms of the variances, will adjust slightly, and we'll make note of that again as part of the final plat.
Is there, does the applicant have a preference as to which one?
He was agreeable to the staff alternative plat. I think he thought that was a good idea to have the straightened out lot lines.
Okay, good. Thank you.
All right. I could just make a comment.
Yes, Member Fisher?
I think the staff suggested lot lines are far better, just in terms of just the practicality of it. I can barely mow a straight line between my property and my neighbors. I can't even imagine how you would figure out how to, to do all that. So I just think it's a more practical, long-term solution.
All right, good. All right. Does someone care to make a motion to extend the public hearing on this matter till May 27 at noon and then close it and then continue this item for action on June 2nd?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by member Staunton, second by member Fisher. Further discussion? Roll call, please, Ms. Allison.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle.
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle.
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher.
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. Motion carries. The matter is continued until June 2nd, and the public hearing will stay open until noon on May 27, 2020, and then it will close. People can submit testimony either verbally or in writing. All right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holland. Thank you very much.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Mr. Razul, for being with us this evening. And we'll look forward to having you as part of the meeting on the 2nd of June as an observer.
Thank you.
There won't be any participation by you unless a question is asked on the 2nd of June. It's not a public hearing.
I understood. Got it.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda. We had only that one public hearing matter on that portion of the agenda. And we've got a resolution proposed by Manager Neal, which is Resolution 2020-54, and that would amend the 2020 general fund budget. Manager Neal, and where's Don? Is he here still?
Yes.
There's Don, our finance director, Don Urim. They worked together on this proposed amendment here to the budget. And Manager Neal.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor, members of council. This has been something that I have been kind of giving you kind of slow notice for the past few council meetings that we were working on this and that it was kind of slated to be on your agenda for tonight. What we're asking the council to do with Resolution 2020-54 is to amend the city's 2020 general fund. And the purpose of this amendment is to reduce the planned expenditures by around $2 million, a little over $2 million. And the reason we're asking you to do that is that we are expecting a $1.4 to $1.5 million shortfall in our general fund revenues. It's important to know that our general fund, which is approximately $45 million in spending for 2020, is about a third of our total city spending in 2020, which is around $126 million total. That larger number incorporates all of our spending with regards to all of our different operating funds, all of our rec enterprise funds, all of our personnel spending, debt service, capital, et cetera. So the general fund comprises about a third of our total spending, but it certainly takes more than a third of our attention. And the reason it takes more than a third of our attention is that it really is where most of our property taxes are budgeted from, right? And our general fund services are kind of the guts of city government, right? It's public works, it's parks and rec, it's police, it's fire, it's community development, it's engineering, it's all of those kind of basic city services that come out of our general fund. The shortfall that we are expecting is related to the pandemic. We've spent a long time taking a look at where the pandemic impacts our budgeting, and really, unlike a natural disaster, this is a natural disaster, but unlike let's say a weather-created natural disaster, where our stress would be on the expense side, we'd be incurring a lot of expenses related to cleanup and that sort of thing. Most of the stress from a fiscal standpoint of this natural disaster is occurring on the revenue side. So the revenue side in terms of user fees, park and rec user fees, from the court fines side of things, we're also seeing this in all of our rec enterprises as well. I will tell you that the analysis that we're presenting to you tonight and the action that we're asking you to take only impacts our general fund. We are doing a separate analysis because of the complexity in our recreation enterprises, and we plan to bring the same kind of action, or at least the same kind of presentation to you on our rec enterprises at your meeting in June, your first meeting in June. So what we're asking for is the council's approval of a $2 million reduction in expenses, $1.4 million to cover the revenue shortfall, and a hedge of around $600,000 as we figure out what's going to happen with our property tax collections. Our property tax collections as a city historically are at a year in, year out, 100% of what we levy, we collect. This year, we're not so sure if that's going to be the case or not. So we want to give ourselves a little bit of a hedge there, and that's where the additional $600,000 comes from. If we don't need to, if our property tax revenues come in at 100% or close to that, we'll have $600,000 in this case that we could put toward our budget stabilization fund for 2021. So that gives you just a brief explanation of what we're looking for tonight. And Don Urim, our finance director, and I are happy to answer any questions that you might have about tonight's action.
Andrew Neal?
Yes.
So I guess the question that I have is...
I hear it just came back.
What?
I lost you all there for a few seconds.
Okay. So the question is, do you feel pretty comfortable with the adjustments that you're making right now and on 2020? That's accurate, I think. An accurate statement.
Yes, Councilmember Anderson, members of council, yes. I think one of the advantages that we give ourselves by making this kind of budget adjustment at this stage of the year is that we give ourselves, that gives us more time to achieve the savings that we need to achieve. If we wait and do this much later in the year, like some cities are doing, their reductions are going to be much more dramatic, and that'll be tough to do.
No, I think you're prudent in your approach. Either you or Director Urim, if you look towards 2021, and you've mentioned the budget difficulties that you anticipate in 2021, and I tend to agree with you. In fact, I might have a little different, maybe a little darker vision of 2021, just based on capacity within the economy and where we are right now, the ability to rebuild. Are you, in that model, as you consider that going forward, do you have an overall recovery view that you've incorporated into 2021, or even looking down the road at 2022?
Councilmember Anderson, members of council, hearing you say that makes me very nervous, given your experience in the real estate world. I think our biggest concern in our valuation in the payment of property taxes really is coming from the commercial side. And as you hear, there's a lot of attention paid to the Mall of America this week by the state legislature, and some discussion around the tenants in the Mall of America aren't paying their rent to the owners, and the owners want some kind of settlement or some help from the state to cover those losses. We're going to see that in a lot of commercial real estate buildings, whether they're retail or office. We're going to see a lot of that same kind of thing going on. That ultimately comes back to impact the flow of rental income in those buildings. Ultimately comes back to impact how those buildings are valued and how those buildings are taxed. And so one of the things that we know is that the economic activity that's happening in 2020 is going to impact the value that building is going to have on January 1st, 2021. and we don't tax that value until 2022. So there's a tail to this that we're going to have to deal with, and I think we are trying to set ourselves up in a good position to do that.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Mayor, you're muted.
You're muted. There you go.
Member Brindle.
Thank you. So I heard the mayor of Bloomington speak a couple of weeks ago about what they anticipate to be some of their budget challenges, because a majority of their property taxes come from commercial businesses. They have lots of hotels, they have lots of businesses. And so how the economy is hitting those businesses and their ability to pay their property tax is contributing heavily to what Bloomington sees as a very serious budget situation. What's our proportion of residential property tax to business property tax?
Councilmember Brindle and members of council, I don't have that with me here tonight, but I did have it, and I shared it, I think, at a previous after a previous council meeting. It's actually about the inverse. I think I think that the commercial industrial property, in terms of the composition of the total tax base of Bloomington, I think is maybe 60% of their total, and residential is 40%. And for us, it's the inverse. We're about 3/4 residential and about 1/4 on the commercial side. So we have less exposure to weakness in the commercial real estate market than Bloomington does.
And it doesn't mean that our residential property taxes are going to be that rosy either, because is it the county extended the period of time that property taxes, did they delay the May due date? Is that what happened?
Yes, Councilmember Brindle, the county commission made a decision to delay the payment deadline for the property first half taxes that were due on May 15th. They've delayed that till July 15th. So there's 2 months there, 2 additional months, and then we'll receive their property taxes that they collected on May 15th. We'll receive them in June sometime. We'll receive some more in July, and then the final pay we'll receive in August. They're usually about 30 days behind. That's good, and we agreed with them when they asked us for our input that this was something that they ought to do. The downside of it is that it makes it much more difficult for us to project where we're going to be at the year end, because we won't know how we did in the first half until the middle of August sometime, maybe the end of August. So we'll have we might have a pretty good sense here of that if most of our property taxes are being paid by escrow agents because they're part of a mortgage. We will get all of that, just as we would have anyway. So we may find out that we're going to get a large percentage of what we levied, maybe close to 100, but we'll be watching that very carefully.
Okay, and what do you hear about the possibility that they would extend the October 15th tax deadline?
Yeah, the county is not talking about that yet, but we from the city, kind of the suburban city manager group, we anticipate that they are going to do that again, depending on the kind of comeback that the economy makes here in the summer and the fall.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions, observations?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Member Sutton.
So picking up on that, Scott, the approval you're asking for tonight takes us through the end of 2020. Is that right?
That's correct.
So we'll know more, it sounds like, at the end of August about the first half submissions, and then I suppose also, even if there's a delay, probably by around the end of the calendar year, we would know more about the second half.
That's true.
And is there anything that would prevent us from taking similar steps at the very beginning of 2021?
For the 2021 budget?
Correct.
Yes. I think, remember too, there's going to be a step in there in September when we come to you and ask you to formally approve the 2021 property tax levy. That's the second year of a 2-year budget, but the action that you took to kind of tentatively approve that isn't official. You have to take an actual action on that. And so,
right. And so we have to do a do not exceed number in September, but then we make a final call on that in December, correct?
That's right. Right.
So in December, we could adjust for 2021 as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I think you've done terrific work on this, and it's been, you've responded very quickly and smartly, and I think this is a really nice balance, and I applaud your effort and Don's effort and the whole staff.
Thank you. It's a big team effort to make something like this come together in a way that is humane and rational, I think.
We've been hearing, yes, Member Fisher, go ahead.
I would just, thank you. I would just concur with Councilmember Staunton. I think, Scott, you and your staff have done a really nice job. I don't look at, this isn't the last action we're going to take in this regard. I think it's good to take some of these earlier rather than later, and later we're going to know more and we're going to take other actions. But it's sort of like, the way I sort of look at this one is it's like when you're being advised when you're earlier in your career to invest consistently so you don't have to get crazy later. And this is sort of similar. It's like we got to make, in the reverse, we have to cut some spending now so we don't have to be so drastic later. And I just think it makes sense. And we'll
good
just
analogy.
Continue to be nimble as we go along.
Another thing I would say that I appreciate is that despite the fact that there's conversation at both the state legislature and in Congress about helping cities, what we're doing is indicative of our self-reliance. And so we're going to make some decisions here that make our budget work for us and for our residents, and go into a more austere mode. So regardless of what happens with respect to funding from Congress or funding from the state legislature, I think we've got ourselves well positioned. The other thing I would just make an observation on as a distinction from Bloomington, I think we got a much more balanced tax base than they have, even though those percentages you say might be reversed. On the commercial side of their situation, it really feels like most of their eggs are in two baskets. They're either in the hospitality industry basket or they're in the Mall of America basket. And it's really, you're better off if you have a more balanced sort of situation with respect to the properties in your community. So you've got a mix of things that you're relying on to support the things that your residents want in your community. And I think that's one thing I'm grateful for in Edina, that over the years, councils have been careful about that property mix and have looked carefully about not getting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak.
And thank you, Your Honor, for reminding me to make a comment about the federal funds. I think it is important that the council know that they're in this budget amendment and what we're doing with the rec enterprises that we'll talk to you about in first meeting in June, is we're not assuming any federal assistance or state assistance for that matter in our budget. So if we do come by some at some point here, and there's talk that we will, that goes to our bottom line, and maybe we can make some different decisions. But we're not assuming in our modeling that we're getting any.
Yeah, and I think we've already heard from our legislative delegation that in the per capita calculations they're making over at the state legislature, there was a certain amount of money that might be coming to Edina, but I like the idea that we're not relying on that or waiting to see what happens with that before we make a decision that's best for us and standing on our own 2 feet.
And it is worth noting that they have adjourned and they didn't make a decision on that money. So who knows?
Yeah. And then that money was for reimbursement. That was limited by the language of the CARES Act. I think it would be an ability to reimburse expenses that were COVID related, but that wouldn't necessarily translate into helping us with respect to our greatest loss, and that's on the revenue side.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, I would join my colleagues in saying thanks for the good work by both you and Finance Director Urim and the rest of the Finance Department team. Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 2020-54, which would amend the 2020 General Fund budget?
So moved.
Second.
Member Anderson moves. Member Brindle seconds. Further discussion? Roll call, please, Ms. Ellison.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle.
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher.
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. Thank you for this good work.
Thank you.
All right. And now the next matter in this portion of the agenda is proposed resolution 2020-48. It's been crafted in 2 different ways, as a grant or as a denial. It requests a parking stall variance and revised development site plan for 4500 France Avenue, which is known as the Lorient. And Director Teague, we've closed the public hearing on this matter. The council is going to make a decision tonight on this revised development plan and the parking stall variance request. And I'll let you take it from there and introduce the topic and tell us what you want us to be thinking about in addition to all the material that we've had, plus the public hearing that we've had. Director Teague.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. So as mentioned, this item was continued from your May 5th meeting. When you all considered this project 2 weeks ago, the applicant had offered a 1-year lease to use those spots to the south. He had indicated to the Planning Commission he was willing to go to 2 or 3 years, but we had the written document for the 1 year. Today, he's proposing to establish an easement or a lease arrangement for 10 years. Edina has a city code section 361315, and it talks about when granting easements like that they need to be for at least 25 years. So to address that issue, staff has provided a couple of alternative resolutions that are included in your packet. So you actually have 4 resolutions in your packet. The 2 new additional ones are labeled Resolution 2020-48A, that is for approval. And the second is Resolution 2020-48B, that's the denial resolution. So both of those new resolutions added address that section 361315. The approval resolution has references specifically to that section and adds a condition that once that 10-year agreement expires, they would have to establish a new one, or alternatively, they could come back and ask for a variance, kind of similar to this same process. In 10 years, who knows, maybe we have district parking, our standards for parking may change. Hard to predict 10 years from now. That's the approval resolution. The denial resolution with the B by it adds that specific reference again to section 361315 and it beefs up that denial resolution in that the applicant has offered a 10-year lease or easement. And again, that code section talks about 25 years. So I will stop there. We do have on the line with us Max Moreland from Spec Solutions. They did the parking and traffic study. So if the council has any questions in that regard, And also Ted Carlson, the applicant, is on the line as well if you have any questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to the council for discussion.
All right. Anyone have any questions for Director Teague relative to new resolution 2020-48A on approval or 2020-48B on denial, or other comments? We can start the conversation on this matter. Member Fisher, do you want to start us out?
Sure. I was just looking up a document here on the. So you just want us to kind of.
Yeah. So what is the? I'll ask Director Teague on 40. Take us through 2020-48A on my electronic copy here. Unlike on 2020-48B, you've got red line language in 48B. Dealing with denial. And so what's different? Where is the differing language in 2020-48A?
The language is also redlined in that document. It starts on page
I didn't scroll down far enough. There we go. All right. It's on item set, paragraph 7, right above section 3 on approval. I just want to read it. Yeah.
So I do have a question for Carrie.
Yeah,
so this 10-year easement for the property next door, which is owned by the developer, would that be so I know it's a 10-year, not 25-year, which doesn't technically meet the ordinance requirement. But the fact that it's on adjacent property owned by the same property owner, would that piece allow it to fit within sort of our regulations?
It could. They would still need a variance. The parking that he's provided, you recall, the parking stalls that he's providing on the south lot are enough to cover what the SPAC report says is needed at the peak times of operation. So they would still need the variance. But I believe they would have to combine the lot, so it's all one lot of record, and it's all shared parking, essentially. We would still have to go through this variance process.
All right, so technically it doesn't meet the requirements of our ordinance without some changes.
Correct.
All right.
What about, maybe this is a question for Roger, what about cross easements? Does that meet the spirit or intent of the language of the recently discovered ordinance?
Mayor, members of the council, I believe it would if they were permanent easements.
Yeah, cross permanent easements. Okay, yes. But we don't have that here.
Oh.
Correct.
Okay. My computer just decided it wanted to reboot itself here, so excuse me as I wrestle with that. But I think I got the answer to that question. And then on 40, on B, you have 2020-48B. You've got, as I mentioned earlier, red lines as well under section 2, paragraph 5. States that the required number of off-street parking spaces should be located on the same lot as the principal use or on an adjacent lot under the control of the owner of the principal use. For purposes thereof, control may be derived from ownership by lease or easement continuing for a period not less than 25 years. So they either have to have a lease or an easement in place for at least 25 years. Is that it, Roger?
Mayor, that is correct.
Okay. All right. So we originally made a decision on this matter in looking at the resolution 2018-137, and that was one that I signed on December 18th, 2018. That had, I think it was the condition that Member Staunton imposed, which was the condition 14, the restaurant shall be limited to 35 seats and located at the northernmost retail space shown on the site plan. And as the applicant has come back, the developers come back and asked for a variance on parking to enhance the capacity, seating capacity of the restaurant to 110 spaces. We've had a lot of opinions on it from the neighborhood and others, I'd say primarily against it, but some in favor of it. We've had some really effective testimony, I think, from residents in our community. And I know our council has given this really careful thought. And Member Fisher, I see your screen kind of lit up there, so I'm assuming that you're ready to speak.
Sure, I can lead off. That's fine. So my comments are probably going to appear all over the place. And as I think about it, there's probably a reason for that. My notes are a mess. And I've probably changed my mind on this 6 times since the public hearing. So in a way, I'm going to talk for and against it and why I would go either way and then get to an answer. So to lead off, though, I do have some regrets here tonight. And my first one goes back to 2010. 2010, I was the chair of the Planning Commission, and we had, at that time, put together a list of about 34 ordinance changes that needed to be made, either new ordinances or changes. And one of them, as I look back to that list, was parking. We recognized in 2010 that our parking ordinance was out of date and, was one of many that needed to be updated. Now, while we accomplished a lot with that planning commission, that's when we established PUD and sketch plan and setback updates, a lot of good stuff. We never got to parking. And I termed off of the planning commission, as I'm sure others did, and apparently we've still never gotten there. And so that's a regret, because I think it would have really helped us to have sort of modern parking ordinances. The second regret is from our council meeting back in October 2nd of 2018, because that's when we ultimately approved this project. But as you all know, when you're dealing with a redevelopment project, you're it's almost a dance in a way, or a negotiation, and you're trying to come up with the best solution, especially when it's adjacent to a neighborhood like this. There are a lot of parties that find that negotiation really important. And at the time, I went back and watched that meeting, and because I couldn't remember what I even said in the meeting, and I wanted to kind of understand where I was coming from back then. And I regret that I didn't think about what a 35-seat restaurant might look like or feel like. It just seemed like a number, and it made sense because it had to do with we talked about our ordinance, and it was just another of the conditions that we talked about. But since then, and primarily in the last week to 2 weeks, I've been really trying to think about what a 35-seat restaurant is and what that does either for or not for a neighborhood. And I've called a number of experts in retail and restaurants and urban design, and the numbers that they come back with for a 100-seat restaurant would be, and they all vary, but they all vary between 30 and 40 seats is what you really need for this type of restaurant. And then I started thinking, what restaurants do I think of in Edina that are neighborhood kind of restaurants? I just get that feeling when I come in there, and one of them is the Hilltop. Now, what's unique about the Hilltop is I don't think anyone's walking there. I mean, you pretty much have to drive to the Hilltop. But we've all been in it, I'm guessing. That restaurant has 134 seats, which is surprising to me. That's a lot of seats. I didn't feel like it was that big. But they have a 200 seating capacity for that restaurant. They have 45 parking spots, and we've all been there when they haven't had enough parking. Say there's 15 cars on the street. So, it's probably a 200 person capacity with 60 parking spots. The other one I think of is Town Hall Station, which I think is the ultimate little neighborhood hangout. And I think of it as a very small restaurant. So when I say 35 seats, I think, oh, that must be kind of like Town Hall Station. Town Hall Station has 75 seats on the inside of the restaurant, and then another 75 out on the patio. So that little neighborhood restaurant actually has a capacity of 150. So it really reframed for me what a 100-seat restaurant is. And I actually feel like it's exactly the kind of restaurant that would benefit this neighborhood. So my concern, if we don't approve this variance, is that one of two things will happen with this space. And it's not saying it will absolutely, but it's my concerns. One, it's going to be filled with sort of low activity use, like a financial office of some sort or that kind of thing, where it doesn't bring life to the street, which I think is a really important element in this business district and for the neighbors as they are walking past here, that feels like there's activity. It's not just dead space in the evenings. Or the second scenario, that's actually the one I fear a little bit more, is that it will be a restaurant, but it'll be by necessity a high volume, high turnover restaurant. So if you have 30, I picture the restaurant that's being proposed here to be 100 seats, but it's sort of the hour and a half meal, visiting, kind of hanging out restaurant. A 35-seat restaurant's going to feel a lot more like a turn it over, it's a Five Guys or it's a Leon Shin, something that some people will stay there, but more are coming and going. And to me, that's the far worse condition for the neighborhood. I think back to the public hearing, to the Planning Commission. I will say a lot of great comments from both sides of the issue. Really exceptional, actually, thoughtful. The one that really stood out for me was Bob Cundy. I think at the public hearing, and I don't know him. I wouldn't recognize him if I saw him, but his voice over this public hearing process it really resonated with me, and I thought his points were excellent. I also thought the Planning Commission made the right decision on this particular variance request. At the end of the day, I think we all want the same thing. The neighbors, the developer, the council, we all want a vibrant business node that enhances property values for everybody and for sure doesn't detract from anyone's property value. So on October 2nd, when I reviewed that meeting, three of us basically said, and myself included, that we would agree to this development, but we had to limit the seating in the restaurant to what our parking ordinances allowed. And like I said, I wish I would have really done this kind of research for that moment, for that item, but I didn't at the time. I think I understand it so much better now. And but the reality is, whether we like it or not, I feel like that's what we all landed on. And as I mentioned in these redevelopment projects, we all work so hard to come to those conclusions, and the neighbors' opinions part of that mix, right? And we come to a point where maybe not everyone's happy with all of it, but you kind of land at a spot. And we landed there. And to right now, change it. The building's not complete yet, and to change it feels not right, because we haven't even finished what we agreed to start. And there's been some comparisons made to the project just a block to the south or 2 blocks to the south where we did grant a variance. And I would say there's a very distinct difference, and that is they built it, they operated it, and then came back with data. And that's different than this one. And as much as I've given you the reasons why I think it may be a mistake to not, to kind of let this opportunity go, I think it's a bigger mistake to have this so-called agreement with the community, with the neighborhood, and then pull the plug on that agreement and change it before you even come out of the chute. And so as much as it pains me, I feel like that's where I'm falling is, well, I think it's probably not the best solution. I think in a way it is the best solution for today. And with that said, I feel strongly, we can talk about it tonight or another night, but I think we have to move forward much more aggressively with district parking here. I mean, I was listening and watching that meeting, and this is already October of 2018, a year and a half ago, and we really haven't, gotten the ball rolling on district parking, and we have to. So we need to make that a priority. And not just district parking, but district stormwater. I would argue that every business, every property owner on the north side of Sunnyside, if they wanted to redevelop their property to do anything, they're not going to be able to either. And so it's going to be incumbent on everyone to come up with a solution where we can solve this and have a vibrant business district. And number two, I'd like to ask the Planning Commission to accelerate parking ordinances in their work plan. And I realize even in an accelerated way, we're talking a year from now before we've kind of gone through the process, the public process, and update our ordinances, and certainly not going to impact this project one way or another, but I think we need to start looking at that sooner than later. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Fisher. Member Staunton?
Sorry, me?
Yeah, Member Staunton?
Okay. So I want to start out by just reiterating what I said last time and what Councilmember Fisher said as well with respect to the commentary that we received. One of the things that's a little easy to forget is we're in the middle of this chaotic time and we're trying to do our meetings remotely, and it's all very different, and it would be very easy to not have robust communication with the public on this. And I gotta say, I was so impressed with the comments, regardless of the perspective. They were substantive, they were really full of information and perspective, and I thought it was a terrific just kind of demonstration of good listening and good speaking up on behalf of folks. So I thank everybody who participated so robustly in that and has right up until this afternoon, frankly, continued to send us emails. The other thing I want to recognize is I think this is shaping up to be a really good project. I went over to look at it and I like the way it's looking. One of the things that we had as a condition on this project was that they bury the power lines, and there were some snafus along the way about doing that, and there was a hiccup. I remember one IX.A meeting where we got a little hot with Mr. Carlson about whether that was going to happen or not, and he committed to it, and it really is a big improvement. And there's another business on the corner of 44th and France that has turned over and has done a renovation that looks beautiful, and I think it's headed in a really good direction. And so this project and others, I think, are taking this area in a really good direction. I agree with Councilmember Fisher and that our parking ordinances are probably outdated. I think there's a legitimate debate about how much parking this area needs and what a restaurant like is being proposed here would actually need. You've got neighbors who are understandably nervous about that, but then you've also got a consultant who's telling us it's pretty close to being the right amount. I don't know what the right answer is, but I'm betting that our current regulations are probably not the right answer. I could be persuaded that there's enough parking to make this thing work. But the question here is really about what's the best way to make that decision. And to me, this feels like the ultimate legislative decision. It feels like the kind of thing where you need to go correct that. And you need to have a global study with neighbors engaged, with the people who participated in a small area plan. And it may be specific to this area, and it could include district parking. You know, I know the Planning Commission members expressed some frustration with the lack of the city's effort on getting district parking going. But we don't own really any useful property in that area. We can be a convener. We own some drainage ditch property in the area, but it's not really something we could put a parking facility on. So there needs to be a collaboration among the private property owners in that area, and the city should do what it can to help. But that should also be combined with a rethinking about what's the right parking requirements for the right uses, et cetera. And how can we leverage that parking into getting the things we want in the area as a community. But all of that sounds to me much more like a legislative discussion than it does a variance. And I think doing this by a variance is just feels like the wrong answer. Mm-hmm. And it is different, I think, than the one several doors down on France Avenue. Partly because they have a track record, but more importantly is the scale. I mean, we've got a huge number of spaces here and a bigger impact potentially on the neighborhood. And B, this was part of a planned unit development. This was part of a carefully constructed deal. And frankly, if we didn't foresee that a 35-seat restaurant would be impractical and would be the wrong answer, the developer should have. And that's on him. And frankly, we probably would have had a different conversation at the time had he come in and said, I'm going to do a 100-seat restaurant and I only have this much parking for it, but I can make it work with these different configurations. So I think that's doing a variance in that circumstance doesn't make sense to me, where it does when you're talking about 2 or 3 spaces for a small building that's on a former residential lot, just 3 doors down or 4 doors down, that knows already the kind of impact they're going to have. So I also think that, I have some experience with parking in my day job, parking regulations, and I can tell you that 10 years will go by in no time. And so it seems like a long-term lease as we sit here, and we may not be around, but it'll be done in no time. And then there's no way to enforce it. At the end of 10 years, you're not going to shut down the restaurant. You're not going to stop them from doing their business. You're just going to deal with it. So I don't think a 10-year lease is a practical solution here, even if the variance were accepted. So I will vote against this and hope that we can work, as Member Fisher says, toward some more durable solutions for parking in the whole district. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Member Staunton. Member Anderson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a question. I think Mr. Moreland is still on here with us. Max, are you there?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm here.
In 2018, you made the parking presentation to the council in 2018, I believe.
I believe that is correct. Yeah.
Yep. And so I just want to confirm a couple numbers with you that I've been wondering about. Now, I think, if you recall this, I think at that time, the Edina Cleaner site had 230 trips a day, based on your assessment at that time, and you computed the new structure would have 500 trips a day. Is that accurate?
500 trips a day sounds correct for the new one. Okay. The Cleaners one, I don't have the number in front of me, but that sounds in the ballpark, reasonable, yeah. Yeah,
actually, like Member Fisher, I went back and viewed both that meeting and the approval meeting to have some clarity on that. I just want to confirm, because sometimes these parking issues are sometimes confusing for me. So So at 500, and then I believe that you mentioned at that time that those trips would be about the same. The 230 to the cleaner site was roughly equivalent to the residential traffic, the underground parking for the residences, which leads me to come to my number from that point is that we've got 270 additional trips on the site based on that proposal, which was approved at that time. That sound right?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Right. So
for the commercial portion of the site.
Yeah. Okay. So the question that comes up for me then is if we went there to say 100 seats or 80 seats or 75 or whatever you might be able to back into and justify, what's the right multiplier for the additional trips? I mean, are we going to have? I mean, if we went straight by the fact that we have roughly 270 that are being generated by the retail and restaurant traffic, that tells me that we could be looking at 700 or in excess of 700 trips, but for the retail and restaurant traffic.
Sure, that's a good question. In our updated parking assessments, we kind of looked at that impact, that change. And so there's one little qualifier here. In our 2018 study, we based the number of trips for this restaurant based on the square footage of the restaurant, not on the number of seats itself.
Oh.
So we did it as a 3,700 square foot restaurant versus now we're looking at it as a 100 seat restaurant. And the actual number of trips difference is only about 10 extra now with doing 100 seats versus a 3,700 square foot restaurant. So I guess if we were to back calculate in that original study, as a 3,700 square foot restaurant, it was closer to maybe a 90 or so seat restaurant that we were looking at, but kind of a different unit that we looked at there.
We're comparing apples to oranges now, in other words.
A little bit, yeah. But we wouldn't expect the traffic impacts to be much different than our original traffic study from 2018.
Okay. All right. Well, that's helpful, and thank you for being present and being able to answer that, because that's been a little bit of a head scratcher. Because I attended both of those meetings at that time, but I wasn't in a decision-making position. So I did go back and take a good look at it, and a couple of things jumped out at me about the Planning Commission approval meeting, and as well as the final approval meeting in 2018. And I thought that Planning Commissioner Berube kind of took a step back, and I thought she had a very interesting observation, because what she looked at, and she communicated that, I believe, on March 9th as well to the council. What she looked at there was not so much the restaurant, the number of seats, square footage. It was really a matter of how's that intersection handling traffic? And do we have that figured out? And then I noticed that then Councilmember Stewart expressed a lot of concerns about the turn radius and the traffic flow there, and whether or not the deliveries that were going into the area, would that be too much for the immediate neighborhood? And I'm sure that the members of the council will remember him talking about the pork chop. What I noticed with that is that is a congested site, and that it seems to me that the heavy load arrival at the restaurant is going to coincide with the heaviest traffic counts in that particular area. It's a tight site, and many of you have been over there to look at it lately. So in terms of the application, though, I kind of look at it like what's changed since 2018. And to me, it's that the applicant's business model has changed, at least for the retail and restaurant operations. That's understandable. So what we started with was a 1-year parking agreement with a discussion of 3 to 5. Now there's a discussion of a 10-year parking agreement at the adjacent retail location. And so if we use those, which we now find out just by virtue of 36-1315, what we now find out is that a 10-year parking agreement isn't really applicable. It really needs to be 25. And I don't think the applicant has weighed in on that particular possibility, but the 10-year parking agreement doesn't work either. Although those 15 spaces by calculation, if they were deemed acceptable and granted in perpetuity, could take you close to that 100. It would take you, by my calculation, to 80. And I also think it would be fair to say that some of the district parking spaces would be used for a restaurant there as well. But frankly, it just isn't possible. And additionally, I think that if the easement were granted, then part of it is that those spaces have to be available at 5, and they're available until midnight, which I think it affects the retail operations that are there. Part of the applicant's presentation 2 weeks ago was the no left turn and making a sign there, and it was interesting to observe the no left turn discussion on October 2nd of 2018. Because at that time, the applicant said it wasn't in the best interest of the project. And the consensus expressed at that time was you could make a right turn there, but as soon as you did, you could turn into the convention lot, turn around, and still head down Sunnyside. And that probably hasn't changed. The primary or a primary topic of conversation as well, when the approval was granted, was about district parking, which has come up tonight. And so this district parking is a first. And at that time as well, the applicant referred to the district parking as available to the neighborhood for people grabbing pizza or ice cream. I guess you would assume that if it's a much larger restaurant, a portion of the district space would be used by that restaurant. What was made abundantly clear at the time that the council approved the project was there was a great emphasis on pedestrian and bike safety on that corner. It's a busy corner. And in fact, it was stated as being most important in that consideration, and that only a restaurant that fits here should be built. So ultimately, I just get to who's benefiting, cui bono. So does the city benefit maybe on a subjective basis? Does the neighborhood benefit, including pedestrian and bike traffic? And then, did the adjacent retail operations benefit from limited parking? Or does simply the applicant benefit? There'd be different ways of looking at it, but I think benefit is important. That's the basis of the application. So, at the end, I think that the applicant's done a good job of addressing the concerns that have been expressed about his application. But addressing the concern doesn't really resolve them. And I don't think that tonight, number one, we don't have a permanent parking solution to consider. It's simply not there. And as importantly, and it's been mentioned by both members Fisher and Staunton, we can't tonight satisfactorily answer the concerns expressed in the neighborhood, and they have been numerous and passionate. And so I couldn't support the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Brindle?
Thank you. So, the 2018 conversation comments by the council, I do recall, as Member Fisher mentioned, that and I'm sure I was one of the people who talked about the number of seats in the restaurant will be controlled and determined by the ability to provide parking for that number of seats. And so that's been in my mind. The other thing that's been in my mind is that at that time, the commercial use, a restaurant was talked about, but it wasn't fully determined that a restaurant would be the commercial use there, that there would be more than one commercial use, but didn't really know what those were going to be. So I'm not the least bit surprised that the proposal is back in front of us to discuss commercial use, because there were so many unanswered questions about but about what was going to happen commercially with that building. That said, the underlying feeling for me has been that the amount of parking will drive what the use will drive what the capacity can be. Looking at the other available parking in the area, we keep going back to the property to the south, the Gateway Bank property that is owned by the developer. If the developer owns that property and he today can put together a 10-year easement for parking on that property, why can't he put together a 25-year easement on that property? He owns it. I guess I don't see why. The last time we met, listening to the Planning Commission, the question was about an easement. Nope, not interested in doing an easement. And so here we are, 2 or 3 weeks later, and we have a 10-year easement. Okay, well, if we have a 10-year easement today and the developer owns the property, how do we get to a 25-year easement so that we actually have some parking that can comply with our parking ordinance, that parking can be attributed to this restaurant or dedicated to it, and meet the ordinance? So those are, I don't understand why the developer can't get to 25 years. It's a decision he's made, but it puts, I believe, the project in jeopardy as far as the approval of the ordinance. And I think that's a mistake on his part. I think it's short-sighted, and I think it's too bad. So, and as I look at it, I don't want to feel pressure from Give to Get. That's the real downside to me of Give to Get, is the pressure of feeling like, oh, well, if we don't do this, we won't get that no left turn onto Sunnyside. And I don't want to make a decision by feeling pressure about something that really would be nice to limit the left turns onto Sunnyside because of the neighborhood concerns about traffic being driven around and from this development, or around this development into the neighborhood. So I have to discount that. Looking at, okay, so we limit the number of seats to the amount of parking that's available. What are some of the other developments that we've had recently that have limited parking? And what comes to mind is actually the 2 new buildings at 70th and France. Phoenix at the south, and then directly north of that, the building with E-Trade and Roti. So, there's a lack of activity at both of those buildings. One is a vitamin shop that does most of its business online, and Ameritrade. You really don't see any vibrancy from those buildings. They look nice, but there's no real vibrancy. You don't see any activity around either of those buildings. Part of it is that the door is in the back. The main door is in the back. Roti has the potential of creating some of that look of activity. It creates none of that from the front. I've actually never been there. It doesn't draw me in. It looks like it's closed, and so it does concern me that how this is going to be. I don't want to. On the one hand, I would love this to be a vibrant neighborhood hub of something people would walk to, which is what Townhouse Station has become. And I hope as the area in near Grandview becomes more residential, which I believe it will, that people would walk to Hilltop, which is another great restaurant. And so I do hope that this becomes a neighborhood hub, but I think, unfortunately, I think that it's, the developer might be going about it the wrong way, as far as trying to create something on the fly and not being able to meet what we feel are what we need. As I look at 44th and France, if we can dig up parking places at Gateway Bank, parking places at DP Hugh, at the dental office, I can think of cities we've visited where after the businesses are closed, those parking places are all open for public parking. And I don't know why, the city has not been able, and maybe I just don't know. I don't think we've gotten an update on what's happening at the 44th and France district related to public parking. But we have stated more than once as a council that this is a high priority. But it just seems like it sits there because it's a problem that doesn't have an easy solution. And it's not going to have an easy solution because all the parking is tied up on private property. But there are cities that have handled this, and they've handled it by working with each of the property owners. And what that ends up as is after business hours and on weekends when the businesses are closed, those parking spaces are available for public parking. And I don't want to see parking spaces completely dedicated to one use where they could be open to public parking and benefit the whole area. I am sensitive to the fact that there are 36 parking spaces at 4500 France, and the developer committed that those would be available for district parking. I'm very sensitive to that. And I think the other spaces in the area should match that and be district parking as well. And it would be a completely different discussion. But as it stands right now, I think the biggest impediment for me is the lack of the 25-year commitment for the easement to meet the ordinance to make the parking spaces available to 4500 France. And if the developer would consent to that, he owns the property. I like I said before, I don't understand the reasoning. It's his decision, but that's what it would take for me to support this.
Thank you, Member Brindle. I think the Lorient is exactly what we were all hoping it would be in terms of improving the corner down at, call it 44th in France, Sunnyside in France.
Sure.
And I think all of us were, including the neighborhood, were of a belief that the way we went about approving that project was critically important. But I'll tell you, in an encapsulated sort of way, for me, the use of variances on a one-off or a serial basis is not the way to solve the district parking challenge at 44th and France. When we approved this project, we were very deferential to the small area plan that was created at 44th and France. And I remember distinctly that we had a combination of planning commission members on there and mostly residents from the Morningside neighborhood. that I think worked for over a year, primarily in the basement of the Morningside Church, and had many difficult meetings as they decided how to improve that little jewel of a corner that they all loved, but were worried about changing too much and losing that character and that charm and that sense that you get from being down there. And so it was difficult to get to the point where you took that small area plan, which was at variance with the code at the time, and raised height, for example, increased densities. But people got comfortable with it as they worked on that small area plan for over a year. And then along as part of that work came these 11 guiding principles that they used to guide their work, which we used to guide our work at the council. And one of them was the guiding principle number 7, which is parking. And it says that 44th Street should be reimagined as a community parking facility that accommodates parking for the study area district. As difficult as it was for folks to kind of get comfortable with the small area plan and the changes it would propose to the zoning code, they got there. And when we went to work on this project and ended up approving it, as Member Fisher said, in October of 18, we had to rezone from R1 and PCD1 to PUD. And under our PUD, it was a negotiation to make sure that the project embraced the principles of the small area plan and the PUD ordinance to be consistent with what we had intended for improvements in neighborhoods, particularly with respect to the PUD ordinance. So we also made a determination in that October decision, that resolution, that the existing roadway and parking supported the project. Now here we are, we got a beautiful building going up there, and the building owner has come back with a different idea of what he needs to make that first floor work. But, you know, I think a deal's a deal. We went through a lot of difficulty creating that small area plan. We just made a decision on this in October of 18 in conjunction with the developer on what he was going to give to get certain things from the city. He was great to work with and is continuing to be great to work with. He's building something that is really beneficial to the neighborhood. But the ink is barely dry on the deal that we made in October of 18, and I just don't think, I think it's premature to be coming back and looking at it, especially when you think about the era that we're in, this coronavirus era, where restaurants aren't even open now. And I know this could be something that would open a year from now and the situation will be much different. This could potentially fall into the be careful what you wish for category. That's not why I'm making the decision I'm making not to support the request for a variance. The fundamental reason is that we relied on the small area plan to create this project down there. The small area plan is a good document. It requires district parking, and I think that the use of variances on a one-off or serial basis is not the way to solve the parking problem down there. We've got to get to district parking. And for those colleagues of mine that want to look at our parking regulations, I'm all for that. But let's do this in a logical way and not a one-off way. So I'm not going to support the variance request either. So we've got a couple of possibilities here with respect to this matter. And it sounds like we've got folks in a unanimous sort of situation here that they want to deny it. So the question is whether to use the base document or the variant document, which is 2020-52B. Is that correct, Director Teague?
48.
2020-48B.
Oh, excuse me, I was looking at the wrong matter. 2020-48B.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move resolution 2020-48B.
All right, Member Staunton has moved the adoption of resolution 2020-48B. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Member Brindle. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, Ms. Allison.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle.
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher.
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. 2020-48B is adopted. The request for a parking stall variance and revised development site plan at 4500 France Avenue is denied. All right, let's move on to correspondence petitions. We had correspondence provided to us electronically by staff. Is there anything else that's come in, Manager Neal, that we need to know about?
No, there is not.
Okay. And aviation noise update, anything new for us, Member Brindle?
Thank you. So the Noise Oversight Committee has a meeting tomorrow. We had a pre-meeting today. So we've got an interesting situation brewing in the Noise Oversight Committee, where the City of Eagan several months ago put together a letter with some requests to redirect some flights and reduce noise over the City of Eagan. And so we're going to have a discussion about those requests. So the MAC and the FAA are working through those requests. We're down to, of the 5 requests, we're down to considering 2 of them. And so what we're trying to prevent is just moving noise from one city to another. And so it's pretty sensitive. So it's a very interesting time for me as sitting in the chair representing the at-large cities, because the cities affected by moving the noise, Inver Grove Heights and Mendota Heights, are at-large cities. So it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about. And so tomorrow we'll have a meeting, and it's a great group of people. And so, but it's a lot of work, and it's good work. It's an interesting time for aviation as well, because as you might notice, if you live in an area that has a lot of flyover activity, you're noticing a lot less flyover activity. The different airlines are not just grounding planes, they're retiring planes because they're just not putting planes in the air. I don't know. I really don't know when air travel is going to get back to what it was a year ago. The MAC thinks that it will eventually, but I think it's going to be a while before people travel as freely and as carefree as they have in the past. So, but it's pretty interesting. One of the airlines is retiring all the 777s. Another is, there's a whole list of Airbuses and 767, 777s that they are retiring. And if you drive on 494 past the Delta hangars, you'll see a plane in each hangar and 6 or 7 planes just sitting outside. It's been a long time since we've seen planes grounded to that degree. And so we'll see what happens. The Noise Oversight Committee, matter of fact, the noise that Eagan complained about and wrote the letter about was from runway 17. They're not even using runway 17 because the capacity doesn't need it. So it's a very different situation for the airport than it was 2 months ago. So we'll see what happens.
Good. Thank you, Member Brindle. Manager Neal, anything further on aviation noise?
No, nothing to add to that.
Okay, good. Council comments. Member Fisher, you want to read us off? I'm picking on you tonight, first on everything, it seems like. Sorry.
A way to put the pressure on. I actually don't have anything specific tonight. So thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll jump around a little bit. Member Brindle, we'll go back to you.
Okay.
Smiling and maybe looking at some of your notes.
I do have some notes, and let's see here. So there have been a number of emails that we've all been getting, and about there are too many people at my park, and people are too close together, and I've been thinking about this, about, how long is it? How long can the city, how long can the state be the one who stands there and says, now you need to stay apart from that person, or you need to stay. We all have to be responsible for one another. It's a tough situation when a person looks at a park and decides they have to dial 911 because there's people are playing too close together at the park. It's, somebody's got to take responsibility, and we should all be responsible for ourselves. So hopefully we can do that. I think that COVID-19 is a seminal moment in our lives. My husband and I were talking, and Superintendent Schultz mentioned it too. This generation, the generation just younger than I am, and the generation now graduated from high school, they've seen many more challenges in their young lives than we did in our lives, and I really feel for them. So one of the comments as part of the budget discussion was that potholes will get filled, but not quite so fast, and maybe not as many. Weeds will get pulled, or mowing at the parks will happen, but not quite as promptly. So if there's a park, or if there a garden at a park, or if there's a garden in a roundabout that needs a little weeding, my husband and I adopted the roundabout at Braemar and Valley View. And it just takes every week, we take a walk and go by it and do a little weeding and then continue our walk. It just takes paying a little attention to it to keep it looking nice. So hopefully people who live in the area of some of these gardens can spend some time there and put some of their own contribute some of their own time to the public spaces near them. So that's what I have.
All right, good. Thank you. Member Anderson.
Oh, okay, I'm up. Thank you. Actually, I like following Member Brindle because there's little points that come up, and I was listening to Superintendent Schultz earlier tonight as well. And, you think in terms of kids, everybody's affected by this, everyone. But, these kids who started school 9/11 framed that. And, they're graduating without a commencement exercise with COVID-19. And the younger ones, and I take a look at the concerns that people express about kids on bikes and in parks and so on. And yet, I've got 8 grandchildren, and I know that they're out and floating around. I see them. And I don't know what they're supposed to do. They're kids. it's very difficult for them just to be in the house. Kids Club is starting to come around, and I know we're going to have some activities through Park and Rec. But I'm hoping that we can find a way to find more organized activities and more directed activities for these kids. Because the truth is they are kids, and they're going to be out anyway. And, they'll find ways to engage themselves. And I think I'd rather see it with supervision where possible, when possible, than without it, because I think that that's a responsibility that we have as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Member Staunton?
The only thing I have to say is I can't wait for the barbers to come back online.
How about
one of these days I'm going to show up and it's all going to be shaved off. And you're going to think I went a little nuts, and maybe I will have. So anyway.
Now, how about let's look at that Guinness Book of World Records on most haircuts in an hour and get barbers out to Braemar Arena, out to the Dome, set them up at different places, and we try to cut as many men's haircuts, do as many men's haircuts as possible in an hour. Get every barber in Edina out there and everybody lined up, and we'll break the world's record, the world's record for most haircuts in an hour. So anyway,
that's fun.
I'm with you. I'm feeling pretty shaggy too. A couple of things I just wanted to mention. We talked about the kids. Member Anderson talked about the class of 2020. We had the superintendent with us. Director Benarott was talking about we're paying tribute to all the local high school and college graduates too, in a different sort of way. There's a form online that you can fill out. Get us a photograph. Tell us about your school that you're going to go to and your future plans. And you can upload a photo at bit.ly/honor Edinagrads. bit.ly/honor Edinagrads. That was one thing I wanted to cover. And then I got a nice note the other day from Chris Bonvino, who's an Edina grad. He owns a company called Gemini Athletic Wear. He switched over from manufacturing customized athletic jerseys and team apparel for high school teams and NHL franchises, and I would say probably every league in between, and started doing masks, started producing PPE. They produced 60,000 medical grade masks for healthcare providers in the first month. Pretty impressive. We talked about it. Now he's making gowns. I don't know if I'd mentioned that before or not, but it's worth mentioning twice if I did. And then I want to thank Manager Neal. Good job on the Oak Lane matter, getting that resolved, getting that to conclusion. Appreciate that a lot. And then one other shout out for one of our local residents that we all know, Bokar Kane from our Transportation Commission, called me the other day, and I put him in contact with Chief Schmitz. He runs a little construction equipment business and does a lot of work with MnDOT. He had 100 N95 masks, and he had a couple of hundred, I think he called them medical grade masks that were just a step below N95s. And he is going to get those over to our fire chief, and so we can put them into our inventory for PPE. So thanks to Bokar Kane and his company for making that donation to the city. And that's it for me, Manager Neal.
Thank you, Your Honor. The world's record for haircuts. There's actually 3 of them. The most haircuts given by one barber in 8 hours was done in 2008 by an Australian. This is in 8 hours. Was 375 haircuts by an Australian in 2008. By the most haircuts given in 1 hour by one barber is 34. That was by an American in Austin, Texas in 2013. And the most haircuts in 24 hours was set by a barber in the UK in 2011, 526 haircuts in 24 hours.
Well, I'd like to be able to put all of them to work at once, and we can create a new category. Most haircuts in an hour by, most a certain number of barbers, by 25 barbers, whatever the count is.
There's a category with 10 barbers.
The category with 10 barbers?
Yeah, team.
What's the record for 10 barbers in an hour?
That was the one that was 526. Excuse me, 526.
526 haircuts by 10 barbers in an hour?
In 24 hours.
Oh, in 24 hours. I was just thinking of an hour. But yeah,
So-
24 hours. That's a long haul.
That's my haircutting report. My other report is back to something more mundane of city finance, and that is, as I mentioned earlier, we are working on a similar kind of presentation for you on the recreation enterprises, and that's the part of our budget that's taking the most, that's taking the brunt really of the pandemic. It includes the swimming pool, ice arena, golf course, Edinburgh Park, Centennial Lakes Park, Art Center, and Edina Liquor. So important parts of Edina that really make Edina a place with a high quality of life. They've been sustaining some losses and some difficulties, particularly on the operating side. We've got some ideas on how to deal with that from a fiscal perspective, and we'll share those with you at your June 2nd meeting. That's all I've got for you tonight.
So you just reminded me, I wanted you to address a little bit the aquatic center, and we didn't really talk about the governor's executive order that's in place that is keeping swimming pools closed. We made a decision not to open ours, assuming that at some point in time he may allow reopening. I know some of the folks in our community are upset about it, but do you want to talk a little bit about the reasons why we did what we did?
Yes, Your Honor. There are a lot of reasons, but probably the most important reason is that it's very clear in the governor's executive order that swimming pools did not get the same kind of permissions or grace that a lot of other parks and recreation facilities got in the governor's order just this past week. Very specific about pools. Pools are very difficult to maintain any sort of social distancing. When you jump in a pool that's full of chlorinated water, you're not really jumping into a pool of hand sanitizer. It's not the same level of sanitation. And when you jump out of that pool, if you do carry the virus, you still carry the virus, and you're exuding the virus at the same time. The other thing that's pretty tricky with regards to running a pool operation during a pandemic is staffing levels, and getting the staff that you need and getting them trained all within the kind of current public health environment is really has proved to be too big of a challenge for I would say any municipality that's got a pool. I don't know any of them that are going to be open this year. Some are taking longer to make the decision to close, but I haven't heard of one yet that's made a decision to be open during the year. So we are frustrated by that as well. One of the hardest things that I have to do in my job is tell Parks and Rec people to shut down the Parks and Rec enterprises. That is just not the way they're wired. It's hard for them to do that. And we know that it's hard on residents too. And it's hard on all those people, all those young people that were working there for us, right? There's a couple hundred young people, high school and college age folks who were planning to work for the city of Edina this year who aren't going to be able to work for us this year. And so that's a loss to them. It's a loss to us too.
Okay, good. Thank you. One other thing I forgot to mention is I'm going to head over to Our Lady of Grace tomorrow. A woman named Maureen Trenery, who was the principal over there, is retiring, and they're doing an event for her, and we did a proclamation for her as well, a mayoral proclamation. So I'll go over there to Mass at 9 o'clock tomorrow for a little celebration of her past work at OLG, and she's moving on to spend time both in Minneapolis at a school there and also in Africa. So our best to her, Maureen Trenery. And that's it for me. Anyone else? Did this conversation prompt any other thoughts from council members? All right, good. Well, great to see all of you. I get to see Mary and Kevin this morning, and that was a good way to start the day. So is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
Remember Brindle. Discussion. Roll call, please. Ms. Allison? Ms. Allison, roll call, please.
She's left us here.
Director Benarott, you want to call roll?
Sure. Councilmember Anderson,
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher,
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle,
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton,
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. All right, thank you. We stand adjourned.